Hi guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, we'll tackle about the game of the infamous world champion Liren against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave on their game on the Magnus Carlsen Invitational 2020. So here, Liren here is white and he plays with the move d4, and after Maxime here plays d5, they go for and Slav Queen's Gambit decline with knight f3 after c4, c6 the Slav. And after knight f3, Maxime here play the move knight f6. And after knight c3, here comes now the Slav bishop with bishop f5. And tries to control a lot square on the board on f5. But Liren here release now the tension on the center with c takes d5. And after knight takes d5, allowing for the white here to have 2 central pawn versus 1. So Liren here immediately plays queen to b3, trying to attack the undefended pawn on b7 because the bishop now is on the f5 rather than to the c8 to have a defense on the b7. And again with 2 attackers to this knight with actually 2 defender also. But after the black here play the move queen to b6, the black here actually loses a pawn after knight takes d5, c takes d5 and queen takes d5, because after the black queen here actually leaves his defense to the d5 and tries to have a defense on his b7, he actually have no defense on the d5 square. For example, after queen to b3 on this position, Maxime here can actually try an alternative move. For example, after knight takes c3, the idea here, for example, after queen takes b7, knight d5, trying to sacrifice his rook, but still there is a counter after queen takes a8, queen b6, trying to impress on the queen on a8, and here the white tries to rescue his queen with knight e5. The idea is, for example, after knight c7 with an attack to the queen, but there is a simple knight c4, trying to counter an attack to the black's queen also. But after, for example, knight takes e8, knight takes b6, and knight takes b6, the white here is actually satisfied after f3 with an intention to play the move e4 and attack the bishop, because on this position, the 2 knights here is equal to the rook and pawn, and still the evaluation on the board is a radical equal. So going back after, for example, queen b6, that actually leaves a defense to his e5 with only 1 defender versus 2 attacker. So Liren here grab now the knight, and after pawn takes, again there is queen takes d5 winning a pawn, and after e6 defending his bishop. So Liren here retreat his queen and tries to provoke a queen exchange because he has actually an extra pawn. But Maxime here just play the move that c6. But again, with 2 attackers on this pawn with only 1 defender, Liren here plays e3 first to defend his extra pawn. And after, for example, knight to b4, but still there is just simple queen a4 check. And again, on this position, the black here just play the move king to d8 and loses his right to castling. Rather than, for example, after queen to a4, that the black here can actually block the check with his knight. But after, for example, queen to b5, trying to have a force queen trade, but still there is just a simple bishop d6, and after bishop d2, king castling, and queen takes, a takes b6, and for example, after the white plays bishop to b5, that reveals the weakness of the b pawns that is actually doubled on the b file. And we shall see in this position now that this pawn is actually equal to 1, and it is very clear that the white here has an extra 2 pawns on the board. So after queen to e4, the knight c6 here actually doesn't work, so Maxime here plays king d8, trying to sacrifice his right to castling to avoid any, again, loss of material on the board. But still there's just a simple bishop to d2 that allows here for the black to play knight c2 and fork the white king and rook here. But after, for example, knight to c2, Liren here has a simple king to e2, because, for example, after the black grab that rook, but there is a skewer on a5 on the board. For example, after a5, it skewers the queen and king on the board after, for example, the black here grab the rook on a1. For example, after queen takes b2, Liren here just played the move knight to d5 with a threat of mate on d7. Even though, for example, after here king to e2, even though the black here defend with bishop d6 to avoid any knight b5, but still the evaluation on the board favors for white after bishop a5 and skewer. For example, after king e7, bishop takes, pawn takes, and after queen b5. Because after knight takes, still there is a plus 5 for white here with knight to e5, even though the white here is actually has only an extra pawn. But after knight a5, there are a lots of attacking chances on the board that gives more problem to the black's position. So going back after king e2, in which Maxime here plays the move queen takes b2, and after knight to e5, revealing a mate in 1 on the d7, but Maxime here tries to defend with b5 to have a blockade on the connection to the e7 against his queen and knight, but still a queen a5 check, and after king a8 and queen c7, there is a dual threat on this position with a checkmate. For example, after this position in which the white here can deliver a checkmate on the d7 and f7. For example, if the black here defend the d7, but still there is a mate in f7 square. So in just 16 moves, the infamous world champion Liren wins through resignation against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave on the Magnus Carlsen Invitational 2020. So just a recap, for example, after d4, d5, c4, c6, the Slav, and for example, with the variation of knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop f5, and c6, d5, in which the black here allows here for the white to have a pawn majority on the center. For example, after knight takes d5, and with the queen b3 for the white and queen b6, trying to sacrifice his pawn for a cost of development. For example, after e6 and after queen b3 with knight c6, but still in this position, the black here fails to have a compensation for his sacrificed pawn, because there is just a simple a3, and for example after knight b4, again there is just simple queen a4 check, and after a sacrifice of his right for castling after king to d8, for example with bishop d2 first and knight c2 allowing the fork, because after king a2 for white, the evaluation on the board here is actually +4 that favors for the white's perspective. Even though the black here delay to capture the rook, but after queen takes b2, there is a simple knight to b5 with a threatening mate in 1. And even though the black here tries to defend, but still there is queen e5 check, and after king a8 and queen c7, again the possible checkmate on this position against the black king is actually unstoppable. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to subscribe.